Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today, topic experts will share strategies that agencies can implement to alleviate the concern of the unknown and make operations more efficient. My name is Kirsten Kotsaruba, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel discussion. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and ATARC is an organization that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to welcome all of our attendees joining us today, and a special thank you to Karen Borowski and the entire Cribble team. This afternoon, we are going to hear from our panelists, as well as have a Q&A session where we will pop in a few polls and answer your questions as they come through. So before we begin, I want to encourage the audience. You may submit questions of your own in the Q&A section of this platform, and also be sure to answer the poll questions so that you can receive your CPE credit for attending today's event. With that, I'll ask our panelists to please come on camera and come off mute, because we're going to begin hearing from each of you and the opportunity for you to introduce yourselves. So Lucy, I saw you first. Let's start with you.
Yes, I'm Lucy Holmans. I work for the FAA. I've been with the FAA for about 27 years, 9 of which the last 9 years I've been solely cybersecurity. I do everything from my team that started from, I guess, in 2016, really focuses in on the life cycle of anything that's related to air traffic control. So that includes coming up with requirements, coming up with enterprise solutions from a cybersecurity standpoint, as well as testing, penetration testing, et cetera. So again, I'm really focused on the air traffic control systems and services, and that's where my focus is from an FAA standpoint.
Great, thank you. All right, let's jump to Kevin next.
Hi, I'm Kevin Allen Dorsey. I'm the Senior Information Security Officer at CMS. My role is that of the portfolio CISO for the health insurance marketplace, for the Affordable Care Act, and for the No Surprises Act and transparency. I have over 25 years of cybersecurity experience, and I've supported both Health and Human Services as well as the Department of Defense.
Thank you, Kevin Allen. And I have gotten your name wrong a few times, so give me a break here, but Rodrigue, Dr. Rodrigue. Did I get it right this time?
Perfectly.
Yay, okay.
Dr. Tina Rodrigue. I am the CISO here at CFPB. I have 30 plus years of experience in cyber IT, and I look forward to protecting everyone's credit now and in the future.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Rodrigue. And Ed, let's hear from you.
Hi, my name is Ed Bailey. I'm the Principal Technical Evangelist for Cribble. I've been with Cribble for about 2 years now. I was actually one of its first customers back in 2018. I've spent the past 25 years working in, specializing in IT and security telemetry, and then getting that data to various SIM platforms, and then helping them promote better security across organizations. So I feel deeply the challenges that my co-panelists have. It's not easy to secure complex environments, and y'all have the most complex environments possible. So I'm just, thank you for being here, and happy to share.
Awesome, thank you. So to kick things off, I'm just going to call on whoever wants to speak first on this, but it's going to be a quick little discussion on where do you see the level of government security integration between civilian agencies in 2024 and the future. So if we could have a brave panelist step up and just kind of share your ideas with our audience to get this conversation going.
I can start. CFPB really sees itself as CISO's partner. They are huge advocates in this area and are helping us lead the way. There are some areas where we contribute towards new standards, new approaches, especially with new technologies, new threats. But we really work hand in hand to ensure that each and every one of us are protected, and that we are ground truth secure.
Thank you. Thank you. Would anyone else like to contribute to that question too, since we've got some time here?
I'll
Kevin.
speak up. So though I do believe that CISA does a very good job at providing the guidance, I don't believe there's enough being done to have agencies work together to promote things like best of breed. I know within HHS, we do a really good job at bringing together the operational divisions to find out what is each one doing and using that to help determine best of breed for the agency. But it's the cross-agency issues where we have to be very intentional for that to happen, and often requires guidance from OMB before that can even happen. So there's a little bit more of that kind of effort.
Yeah, sounds great. Who else wants to jump in? Ed, would you like to add anything?
Absolutely. And I really appreciate what CIS is doing. I've seen over the past 2 years a definite change in culture and the opportunity to work together. But as Kevin was saying, I think there needs to be a little bit more prescription in terms of how integration happens at not only the level of data exchange, but also in working together. I think it's not as prescriptive as it could be. And I see some of the agencies that I work with, I see it's things are too hard. It doesn't have to be so hard. And I think with some broad changes and some broad leadership, I think this could get significantly easier. But of course, as I mentioned, these are very complex organizations, and making this kind of level of change would require some significant leadership.
Yeah, thank you. And Lucy, let's hear from you next.
Yeah, so I really do agree with both Kevin and Ed. I mean, there does need to be a lot more discussions amongst the government agencies. I really kind of see that there is going to be a driving force, namely being funding for one, because there just isn't enough to keep up with the technologies that are there. But even taking something like GovCloud, right? There is a common platform for government agencies to use it, but I don't think there's really, for example, anything that requires agencies to collaborate in terms of requirements, so that those GovCloud environments are something that could be looked at collectively. So again, there's maybe some framework there, but not as much collaboration as there can be. And again, really looking at funding across the board. I know from an FAA standpoint, there's never enough, especially from a cybersecurity standpoint. But as these things are quickly coming along, it would be great to have more collaboration amongst the government agencies to see where we can combine forces and where we can maybe have those common requirements put into environments that would allow leveraging from all types of government agencies.
Absolutely.
Can I ask a question? So I would think that we could lower a certain amount of cost by working together, by sharing information, by having common frameworks. Do you think that's true in like for the FAA, or am I just too many hopes and dreams?
So, I mean, I think it's gonna have to be, right. So I'm even taking like the space, for example, commercial space is an example where that's more of a shared type of responsibility, where you do have a lot of industry driven activities that go on and drive it. But at the same time, there isn't enough, right, from an FAA resourcing standpoint to really do what they do typically in a commercial aviation standpoint for commercial aviation. So I do feel like that's going to drive it, and I do feel that the budgets, especially if you do see a lot right now, and the FAA is commonly in the news, not necessarily in a good way lately. But again, a lot of it is around just not having the technologies in place and not being able to keep up with technologies, et cetera, because we just don't have the funding to be able to do that. So definitely, if we can collaborate with other government agencies that are already putting in similar types of environments, whether it's cloud, whether it's something that from a space standpoint, now that we are starting to use communication like SpaceLink, et cetera, it would be great to have a common type set of requirements that could be leveraged across the board. And it would be more of a contract that would be more federal government wide, as opposed to government, agency by agency perspective. So I think from an FAA standpoint, I think there is an openness to it, just because we just don't have the budget for doing everything that we need to.
What I would say is that we see a lot of areas where we're having to open new ground. And so what we've done in the past is, when we're having the requirements ourselves, we've been taking them to CISA and having them publish it, so that in any given area where we're starting something fresh, we're using them almost like a clearinghouse to share more broadly. And I invite everyone to consider whether or not they've considered that, because this led to Scuba, for example, where we knew we were, starting something that no one else has done, rather than have everybody else also reinvent the wheel. We just published published it through CISA, how to better, secure your environment. So I think we can, Ed, have more information sharing. I think it is not yet common practice for us to do that, but I think CISA can be the linchpin for all of us to say, hey, I've solved a wicked problem. Let me share it up with CISA to say, this is how I've done it. And then they can further refine and publish.
All right, beautiful discussion to kick things off. Let's put up poll question number 1, which is how many projects are you focused on in 2024 to improve your agency's cyber resilience? So we're going to poll our audience on that, and then we'll get the results up here on the screen for anyone curious to see where everyone's at for 2024. Kevin, we're moving right along to our next question. I wanted to call on you first. How does your agency or department define the boundary between its internal security teams and CISA?
So no, that's an interesting question. You started off with the term boundary. A boundary suggests separation. I see it as more of a collaborative effort. So because of the nature of our work, we're always being audited, as an example. And as such, we have to track very closely on changes in CISA guidance in order to be prepared for the changes that an audit may bring about. Also, because of the health insurance marketplace mission, it requires CMS to collaborate with multiple agencies, both federal agencies, as well as all of the states, as well as private agent broker types. And so we're constantly having to make sure that we do a lot of planning and a lot of early adherence to CISA guidance, because it usually takes these other entities much longer than the federal agencies to come into compliance, because in the end, everyone has to work together for that security to actually make a difference. So what I'd like to see, though, is more venues for cooperation and collaboration within CISA. Because outside of agency or organizations such as ATARC, I don't see as many opportunities for agencies to come together and collaborate. Like I said, because of our mission, we're forced to do it, but it would be great to have opportunities to share ideas and concerns. Ed brought up something that was very interesting. And, how do you go about doing that if you don't get guidance from, say, OMB that says, okay, you need to work together and come up with these good ideas? Anyway.
Thank you. Ed, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I mean, I work in the in the commercial and in the government space, and I think that's one of the things I would like to see, especially for my government customers, because we have spent a lot of time using observability pipelines to translate the data that the agency uses to something that CISA uses, where I think long-term frameworks to establish common data formats, common tooling, common frameworks across all the agencies, I think would have a tremendous amount. Would be tremendously helpful, because skill set simpler, you could have easier access to contractors. Also, just from a contracting standpoint for tooling, where you have just less tooling. And I think the thing is, it doesn't necessarily limit choice, but it helps your teams get better at their tools. Tools are only as good as your expertise, and it's just really hard to get really good at something if you're constantly switching out tools, or this agency uses this tool, this agency uses this tool. It's just really hard to share information and knowledge. And so I think that those are things that I think that's what I would hope like OMB and CISA could get into, because I think there'd be a lot of value there.
Thank you, Ed. Dr. Roderick, anything to add?
I would agree with Kevin that we don't really have a boundary, or we want to work inclusively with CISA. And what I would say is, from CFPB, we understand that they're establishing minimums, but that, it's up to us to innovate and get us to that best practice, right? Even if you're just compliant, that's not going to necessarily get you to the 5th level of maturity to optimize security. And then, as Lucy has mentioned, the budgets aren't getting any bigger, but the threats certainly are. So part of what we have to do is streamline where we can, make sure that we're automating, and then to the degree that CISA is providing tools like through the CDM program or what have you, take advantage of it. And I would love to see a future where any new directive, memorandum, anything came with the capability to achieve it, so that we weren't all, again, inventing the wheel locally.
Thank you. And Lucy, would you like to answer the question as well?
Sure. I mean, I do think that, we have to work with CISA, obviously, for things like data calls, et cetera. But, I do think that from a CISA perspective, it would be great that when they do think about putting out policies or different types of data calls, et cetera, it would be great to kind of work with them on the specifics, right? So I think government agencies are different. Like from an FAA standpoint, right, we are one of the few that actually own a lot of the critical infrastructure that we have that's in aviation anyway. So, being able to maybe tailor or have some more collaboration so that some of the mandates that eventually do come out are more tailored to the environments that it's going into would be helpful as well. So I think, continued collaboration, but again, having CISA maybe being a little bit more focused on the types of environments that are out there and recognizing that when these different types of mandates do come out or data calls, et cetera, would also be helpful, because then it would also help from an executive level within the agency that and better understand what they're trying to say, right? It's always that translation piece that really kind of is hard to sometimes do. So whenever you do see, whether it be executive orders or whether it be mandates or something coming out of CISA, it would, it's always then how do you interpret it into the environment that you're in. So having it a little bit more specific, especially again in an air traffic control environment where we do consider a lot of our systems to be industrial control systems, having that kind of tailoring in terms of their specifying, CISA specifying what what needs to be done there would be great.
Thank you. And any final comments here before I move on to our next question?
Well, I do have a question. I think it's a great point. I think that certain agencies that are critical industries, critical infrastructure like FAA, I think power, communications, probably maybe, would it make sense to have slightly different rules or groupings for agencies depending upon their function? So that way some of the rules could be tailored for the function?
I think that would be great because like I said, to me, it's always, how that gets translated. And so if you have it so that it is more specific to the field or the organization that you're in, it just makes it easier then to, have that then understood, right, from the executives that need to make those decisions. It makes it easier.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I was going to say, when I worked for DoD, there was always a collaborative effort with Department of Energy as well as Homeland Security. So I think, yes, coming together for those specific missions makes sense.
All right. I'm going to call for poll question number 2, please. What is your biggest challenge in meeting required security and retention standards such as M2131? Staffing or funding? Okay, moving right along, then Lucy, if you could kick us off with this next question. How do civilian agencies work with CISA to set government-wide security standards? And can you describe the process and the kind of changes that you would want to see?
Yeah, so right now, at least from an FAA standpoint, a lot of the interactions, right, are really data call based. So when there ever is, anything that does come out, that, whether it's a new threat and CISA needs to understand where it exists within our environments, or whether it's new types of mandates that do come out, where most of our interactions with CISA has been typically through those types of data calls. So again, kind of going back to my earlier point of maybe trying to see if there's a way to collaborate with CISA to be more specific in the types of environments, that would be great. But right now, a lot of the work that we do is around data calls. They also have been starting to do some testing of our, at least not our operational environments, but more of our administrative types of environments, just to see what kind of vulnerabilities are there. Again, to try and increase that to the operational side, would also require CISA to have a little bit more expertise in terms of, the impacts to aviation if something were to be compromised during one of those tests. But, again, trying to better understand what we would consider our high value assets and how that then is really seen from the lens of cybersecurity in general, again overlaid with what the impacts would be to aviation as a whole, would be something that I think would be we need to do with CISA overall.
Thank you. Let's jump to Kevin Allen next.
So for HHS, we receive guidance from CISA, and then HHS headquarters reviews for the impact and provides additional guidance that's pushed down to the sub-organizations such as CMS. Where I see, and I think Lucy kind of hinted at this, I'd like to see more from CISA to receive where the pain points are for the specific agencies. The guidance is, yes, it's guidance, and we can then tailor it to meet our needs. But I think it would be helpful to understand where agencies are having these pain points, because we may find that there are some commonalities that would help then direct future guidance. And so I see that. And so for us, I do like the process, because usually there's a draft process from CISA if they're doing new guidance. And as soon as we see that, we start doing that kind of planning. And I think that's really important. I know sometimes my colleagues are concerned about doing the work with regard to potential guidance changes, but I don't believe that that work is wasted, because it helps with understanding how we do our processes, and it also usually new ideas emerge from the work.
Thank you. Dr. Roderick, would you like to go next?
Certainly. We find that our CISA liaison and our connections into the organizations through, not just directly through CISA, but also through Department of Justice, have really helped us gain momentum on the work that we're doing by having the KEV lists and the multiple areas where they help us ascertain that we are just as secure as we think we are, where we have opportunities for improvement. That really helps communicate not just to the cyber team, but also our broader leadership. And then we found, aside from the data calls, that in the dialogues that we have with CISA around our industry and around the roles we play within the financial regulation part, that they have been able to streamline or add nuance where necessary. And for example, this week for our team, Cyberscope is all the rage, making sure we have it right and tight. And so, being able to communicate back to them where things are well instrumented, where, again, we could use additional guidance or leverage new approaches, that's really been the full dynamic for us, because we do try to be very collaborative with them and leverage our liaisons as much as possible.
Thank you. And Ed, what would you like to share with us?
I think I'd like to ask a question. I do appreciate the process, but do you think the process is too much and maybe takes too long? Because I have more of an outside view of like the last thing I went through, it took almost a year to finally get something that was actionable. And I wonder if we could if it's possible to have a shorter process or maybe smaller scope, so that you could then get to work and have faster outputs. because I think that's something I think that would be useful. But I'd love to have y'all's opinion, because you're having to deal with this, and I'm more have to deal with the output of it, because that's just my view as an outsider. Is I think there could be more progress with a tighter, smaller scope and faster delivery. Does that make sense at all?
I believe it makes sense. Part of the problem is that the threat keeps changing so much that we're constantly sending out new guidance to try to play catch up. The other issue is that there's so many, the government's just so big. Within HHS, there are, I think, 13 sub-organizations, and they all have a different mission. And so, one thought would be, well, CISA could push out to everyone. Then you're still going to run into everyone's going to have to figure out how to make it fit in their mission space. And then if there's interoperability, that's where those issues come on. So in my mind, if we could work on the infrastructure, things like interoperability and common data protection, that would start to help us be able to move faster.
And that's always been my opinion, is that like so many that work that I get involved in is creating compatibility layers between sub-organizations and agencies, which is great for me, but I think that it's bad for the government, and it's bad for your mission, because it creates delay. Where if you would establish common event formats, common protocols, it could short circuit those needs and give you less friction, because it's incredible how much friction of just everyone speaks different languages. And that's where I think that a common framework and I think focusing on having interoperability by default would help make these processes easier. But I'm just real curious what y'all think about it, because especially, I've worked with the FAA. Talk about different types of languages and different types of the legacy that y'all have to deal with is significant. And so those are the kind of things that, and some other organizations, especially DOE, that the legacy protocols, you have to support things that are 40 years old. Things are older than I am. And so, those are the things that I think that, how can we help work together to help solve those problems?
Well, I think Lucy and others would agree that while we all want to be near real time with our answers to data calls, things like that, a lot of the impacts to us are that any new directive, any new data call is unplanned work. And so making sure that we have the capacity to do not only the securing of it, but to report on the securing of it, that's where that instrumentation and automation really makes a big difference. And if it's much like some of the things that we saw this quarter, if it's new areas that have not necessarily been counted before, just getting to an accurate number can be a lot of work in and of itself. So I think that we really could have a cooperative agreement across, but we need to make sure that we're not making it so tight that it's impossible to achieve.
Balance and moderation.
All right. So poll question number 3, and then we'll move on to my next question. We'll get that up on the screen here. How long do you think it will take your agency to comply with the National Cybersecurity Strategy? So that is our third and final poll question until we get to the very end. And for our next question, let's hear from Dr. Roderick first. Is your team collaborating with security teams from other agencies to share ideas? And how do you foster collaboration across government agencies? Would love to hear your perspective on that.
We do collaborate with multiple agencies. If we see in the news, for example, that an agency is struggling, we will reach out to see if there's anything we can lend in terms of lessons learned or new approaches. If there is an area that we're especially proud of, we will host agencies in to see how we do it and share our documentation. If we're adopting a new technology, we will work with FedRAMP to find out who are the security engineers so that we can get their information. And then if there's something where we just need additional guidance, we'll work across with the OMB, CISA, and DOJ teams in order to get their lay of the land and to see what landmines, if any, they've run into and how we can avoid that. So it really has worked out well for us. We're lucky that we're both small and relatively new in the federal space, so we don't have a ton of legacy. And the other part is we just challenge our own value proposition. So if our experience isn't meeting what the brochure promised, we'll start to reach out to other agencies to see, hey, how has this worked out for you, and what, if anything, you're doing better. USCIS, FDIC, there's a lot of innovative agencies out there who are happy to share their expertise.
Great. Thank you for sharing that with us. And Lucy, I know you have thoughts on this topic too.
Yes, so we, from an FAA perspective, do participate in quite a few. So one, we do, and a lot of what we are really focused in on are really existing types of partnerships. So, for example, we already had an interagency working group with DoD, right? So DoD has a lot of dependencies on commercial aviation. So we created subgroups in those that are cybersecurity specific. So we do have a lot of great exchanges with DoD, especially in those areas where they do use some of our services from a DoD standpoint. We actually also collaborate. There's an aviation cybersecurity initiative that's tri-chaired with DHS, DoD, and the FAA, and we work on different types of activities. For example, like we looked at GPS and just the impacts of what would happen if there is any kind of compromise to it, whether there's jamming or spoofing, et cetera. And that, again, are more collaborative-ish initiatives with those two agencies and departments. We also internationally, so that's the one thing about the FAA and commercial aviation, is that it's very much a global type of activity, and we do have to have partnerships across the globe. And so that may even be with states and countries that may not necessarily be always seen in a great light either, but that is a requirement, right? Because we fly everywhere and vice versa. So we do have a lot of interactions. There's an ICAOS, that's the International Civil Aviation Organization, for example, that we do a lot of work to try and see, and that's working with other country governments as well, to try and see what we can do collaboratively across the globe to make it safer. So we're working on things like, for example, a trust framework. So how do we authenticate the different types of communications that we do need, whether that's flight planning, whether that's weather information, whether, again, it's just flying from one nation to another. So lots of different types of initiatives, and it's all done, again, more out of existing types of groups that already exist, but just overlaying it with cybersecurity, which is important because that's a really important aspect in terms of hey, this is what we do on a day-to-day basis, and just kind of keeping cyber to the side doesn't necessarily help it, but kind of having it overlaid in existing forums and processes and groups definitely helps out.
Great, thank you. And Kevin Allen, let's hear from you next.
So we have a collaborative effort with, especially among our 8 federal trusted data source partners, but it's more out of necessity than an intentional effort. But within that effort, we're constantly testing throughout the year. We have an open enrollment period, and so when we're not in open enrollment, we're preparing for open enrollment, and so we're always working with our partners. We're even developing a security and private framework to help ease some of the variations in security and privacy requirements, so that we can collaborate better and interoperate better with our partners. And so from that perspective, it's good. We need to do more with sharing of ideas. Certain organizations, we have joint meetings where we share what our new efforts are with each other, but we just need to have more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Leaning into the second part of that question too, about how do you foster that collaboration across government agencies? For you, Kevin Allen, or anybody else too, just what are some of your thoughts around encouraging that, and what Kevin Allen was sharing about needing more of that?
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, what I was going to say is forums like this definitely help so that you start to put faces to names, and each area can talk about where they shine and what they would like to. So Kevin, Ellen, and I can now establish a strong relationship and help foster that among and across, right? This type of experience is not just valuable for the participants who are listening, but also for us, so that we can learn and lead across the various agencies.
Great. Kevin Allen, were you going to add anything?
I was just going to say, one of the things that CISA does well, there's the security forums, and getting more participation of the agencies in those type of, NSA also does a security forum. As I said, bringing together having these venues where we can come together and share ideas, and have those venues be sponsored by a federal agency versus a private agency, such as, someone like Gartner, who also does things like that. So that's where I see a way to start to build that up.
Thank you. And Ed, I know you're with industry, obviously, but based on the conversation that's been said, what are some of your thoughts and ideas around that fostering of collaboration?
Well, so this is something that we've struggled with a little bit, and we do spend a lot of time working with contracting companies. And what we do is we don't even talk about our vendor tools, because I want to get the vendor out of it and talk more about the strategy and data, procedures, policies. And that's where I think Kevin's right, that it has to be sponsored by the government to make it more neutral, so that you can talk about it as a forum for ideas. Even though with the forums that I sponsor, we do talk about ideas, because I don't really want to talk about tools. But I think that needs to be a little more widespread, and I'd like to see more participation, especially with the contracting companies, because this is something we fight with some of the contracting companies, because they want to do things differently instead of having common standards, because for them, that is their business, is having their own standards, their own way of doing things. And I think that's something I'm sure y'all deal with it all the time, where, and so that lock-in on the industry side, I think, is real. And so that's where I think the government imposing the standards would be helpful. I think it would help y'all get things done a little faster.
Thank you.
Hmm.
Any other comments here before we move on to the next question? Okay, so let's kick it off first with Kevin Allen. I know you have thoughts on this next question I'm about to propose, which is, can you share what your biggest security challenge and biggest goal for the future is right now?
Okay. So I think my biggest challenge is changing the culture of how security is perceived within my mission and organization. Because today, security, it's important, but it's not always prioritized properly. And because there's still a viewpoint of security being only about compliance. And so often, like as an example, the developers, they may push back if there's not enough time or resources to do both security in their business mission. And so what I'm doing is I'm working to change the narrative so that the developers can see how, as an example, more secure code means a more stable code. And stable code is actually a key to our key goal for our business. And so that, we start to create security practices that are included more in how they do business, pushing things like DevSecOps, so that it stops becoming an issue of either or when it comes to security or the business, but security becomes a business enabler. We just need to, so for my goal, that's my goal. And also, that security becomes a business enabler. And one way that we're pushing this is focus more on how security supports the mission and less about the compliance aspects.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. And Lucy, let's hear from you next on biggest security challenge and goal for the future.
So Colin, kind of pulling on what Kevin had started to say, it's culture, but also training, right? So I do think that cybersecurity, and along with that, the new technologies, whether that be AI or whether that be quantum computing, et cetera, I think is going to require a retraining, just a re-education, right, overall. So to me, I think it's the speed, right, with which technology really is changing the environments. And because of that, it's the adaptability, right, as quickly as we can to try and adapt to it. So, I think that, retraining a workforce, or at least having them think in different ways, so that, for example, in the air traffic environment, I think cybersecurity introduces different ways of how issues and problems can be instantiated, right? So where, as in the past, things would be more localized, with cybersecurity, it could be, globally impacting all at once, right? And so trying to understand that, trying to understand how you can use the newer technologies to help. And again, it's really going to be, a retraining, right? And again, it's using things like AI, where you're really managing different types of decisions, potentially, as opposed to, hey, what are the different, what can we do? It's really looking at, hey, these are all the different options, as that's being provided by AI, for example. But now, what is the best path forward? Again, it's a different way to do business. It's a different way of understanding how problems can be instantiated within an operational environment. So that retraining is going to be critical to that. But to me, I think it's really about, how do you now get the workforce to be retrained, and how quickly can you do it? I remember when I started with the FAA back in the mid 1990s. And one of the things that I first worked on is a voice communication system, where, part of what they needed was they used a keypad, and it was tactical. And we were trying to change it to a touch screen. And it was a big uproar, basically saying, the controllers say, we need that tactical feedback, having, a touch screen is just, it's not going to, which now, if you think about it, right, it's kind of like they would be really complaining, because everything that we do, right, is via touch screens. And so really, the personal types of experiences really help drive the changes that were needed. And I think the same is going to happen with something like AI, for example, but it needs to happen a lot quicker than it has in the past. I think I just read this morning too, that there's going to be an app now that you can actually start ordering, customizable chat GPT types of services through OpenAI. So again, I think, private and personal types of experiences is going to help with training the workforce, but it's not going to be quick enough. It's really the speed that I think is going to be the biggest challenge.
Thank you for sharing that. And Dr. Roderick, let's hear from you next.
So I would say that the biggest challenge that I'm facing is everything that Kevin, Allen, Lucy has mentioned, and then also doing everything else everywhere all at once. Part of what we've done on the awareness and training front is we've expanded role-based training, we've applied gamification and nudge theory, and we're working on that front to build the culture so that we have distributed accountability and make sure that everything has shifted left, so that we're not just left of the boom, but left of the build, left of the buy, and left of the budget. Because if we're not incorporated, if we're not in lockstep with every step of the way, we can't get them to the path of yes. So that is our biggest challenge, is either developing teleportation or cloning or automation, doing more with less, and adapting. And then the volume of what we're seeing between the Internet of Things, the increased resiliency requirements, and quantum safe computing, everything along that line, doing it all simultaneously with a group that has not increased and does not have more money since 2017. We just have to be smarter all the time. So the good news is I have a brilliant team, and they're all rock stars. We're 100% staffed, and the biggest challenge is for me to make sure that we are as efficient as possible, and that we're doing only the things we can, and that we are ruthlessly efficient.
Thank you. And Ed, let's hear from you next.
It's very much on the existing themes, and y'all are exactly right. The speed of change is almost frightening, but you have to figure out ways to do it, and automation simply is the only way. I think it's very important to make sure that the agencies have the right talent, and that shifting expectations, shifting budgets in order to, because it starts with your people, it starts with your talent, but that even supports automation. So it's better to have a few of the right people than a bunch of the wrong people, and to have more automation with the right people in order to keep up, because it's simply the only way. And I think that some of the procurement and hiring practices have to change across the broader government in order to support that. because the rate of change is it's shocking. It really is.
All right, now we have time for one more question before we get into takeaways. So volunteer from the panel, but this question is, how disruptive is it changing administrations to maintain consistent long-term security programs? What is that like from your perspectives?
I have done many administration changes. And what I find is that if we're well prepared and stick to the standards and the law, it's just the same difference as moving from your left foot to your right foot. As long as you maintain the momentum and you're very clear and well documented, there may be a jog to the left or right as you move forward, but then just constantly keep towards moving forward. And if you do have to pause, make sure that you're still keeping the other aspects working so that you're remaining vigilant and diligent.
All right, thank you. Kevin Allen?
So I don't really find it so much of a problem. I started in DoD, and the way the DoD is structured, it abstracts away changes in personnel or leadership. And I think also echoing what was just said, if you're prepared and you have a long-term plan, but understand that that plan is going to change over time. The biggest effect I find with changes in administration is funding. And so, but we know that funding, it's always going to be up and down. And so you have your long-term plans, you have your contingencies for each year, and then you make those adjustments. If funding goes down for the certain fiscal year, then it's going to take you an extra fiscal year to get things completed. And so, I don't really have that concern so much, because there's enough plan, because we assume that there's never going to be enough funding.
Yeah, our audience would agree with you too, because that was their response to poll question number 2. They said funding. Okay, probably time for 1 or 2 more comments. Ed, did you want to add anything to that question?
Yes, I think at least from what I've seen, the changing administrations aren't so terrible, but I think some of for legal frameworks, I think it's potentially that the Chevron doctrine might be overturned in an upcoming Supreme Court decision. I think that is something that could potentially have significant impact, because especially your ability to promulgate rules are be called into question, which then would be overturned. And so those are those are things that are going to be a little scary, a little chaotic. And so I think, as Kevin was mentioning, your long-term planning is crucial. You have the brakes in place, have the resiliency in place to be able to handle it, because I think that government agencies with these potential changes in the law are going to see even more disruption outside of the administrative changes.
Yep. And Lucy, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I really haven't seen, much of it. I mean, I think everyone sees cybersecurity as a real threat there. So, I don't think that the changes in administrations have really impacted at least that perspective. And a lot of what is happening is really industry driven, just because of, again, going back to the speed piece of it. So, because of that too, there's a little bit less of an impact between, changing just administrations. But again, together with, both being industry driven and as well as, everyone seeing cybersecurity as an issue that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. I don't think that the administration changes have really been that impactful.
All right, well, there you have it, folks. And we are just almost at the end of our panel discussion here. So we are going to do a round of takeaways from this whole discussion. So each panelist, you have 1 or 2 minutes to kind of share what it is you'd like to end with, and the wrap up of this hour we've just had together. So Dr. Rodrigue, let's start with you, and then we'll just go around and hear from everybody.
I would say that none of us are as smart as all of us, and that we each have the opportunity to be the leaders. While CISA is a great partner, if you have a terrific idea, feel free to work collaboratively across agencies and then work with CISA to publish it for the benefit of all.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been great having you here. And Lucy, let's hear from you next.
Yeah, I think a way, I know I've kind of heard a little bit throughout from everybody, right, about standardization and being able to make sure that we're all kind of working within that same framework. I know that one of the things that we're doing within the air traffic organization is actually mapping everything that we're doing to the national cybersecurity strategy, and there's 5 pillars. And I think that would be, I know within the agency that's a way for us to kind of also try and see how we can standardize it just within the agency. But I think that would also be, a great way for us to also standardize it across all federal agencies overall. Again, training is really going to be fundamental. And, along with that, I know I didn't mention it before, but simulations, I think, would go a long way with that as well. So, creating a simulation environment for the environments that you're in, I think is going to be key in helping to retrain the workforce. And then again, tailoring those standards or, executive orders or anything coming out of CISA to the environments that are out there would also be very helpful, especially for those critical infrastructure environments, especially.
Thank you. All right. And then Kevin Allen.
Well, first off, I want to thank the opportunity for having a meeting like this. As I was pointing out, it's meetings like this where we can come together as various agencies and have these kinds of discussions, and which will promote that information sharing. For me, one of the things I want to see is that we start to work together as agencies by not focusing so much on our unique mission and more on the common information protection and interoperability. Too often we focus on what's different about us instead of what's unique or the same about us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Thank you. And Ed, we will end it with you.
I really enjoyed being here. I really enjoyed listening to everyone. It's great to see what's shared such a common mission of the agencies, a larger government, and also just the appreciation for change, the need to keep up with change and to work together, and really appreciate that. And that's where I think we're going to spend a lot of time working with our partners in the government so we can help promote interoperability. How can we make things easier and remove the friction what can we do to remove the friction that slows things down and makes it harder for y'all to do your job. So, but thank you, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you all for being here, and our audience at home for tuning in as well. So specifically, of course, I need to thank our partners at Cribble for making today even possible. And we really hope to see everybody at our next one, which is, I believe, next Thursday, but that should be up on the screen soon. Speaking of up on the screen, we have our 4th and final poll question, like I said before. So if you want to receive your CPE credit for attending today, that was a little trick. You had to stay to the end. So let us know if you have answered all of the polling questions or not. And like I said before, our next webinar is going to be January 19th, it looks like, the Zero Trust Lab demonstration 2 with Lumen and other technology partners. So we hope to see you there, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their week. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Goodbye, all.
Bye.